Revelation chapter 14. And I looked, and lo, a Lamb stood on the Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder, and I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sung as it were a new song before the throne, and before the four beasts, and the elders, and no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. These are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb, whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the firstfruits unto God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation, and kindred, and tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God, and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven, and earth, and the sea, and the fountains of waters. And there followed another angel, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels, and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up for ever and ever, and they have no rest day nor night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God, and the faith of Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Write, Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. And I looked, and behold a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. And another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. And the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress, even unto the horse bridles, by the space of 1,600 furlongs. Revelation chapter 14 begins with talking about the 144,000. And I think it's interesting how topics like this in Revelation, it seems like they come and go. Like, we've already heard of the 144,000, but then they come up later and some more information is given. Here, we find out, I think this is the first statement, that the 144,000 are virgins, and I think it makes it clear that they're men, virgins. They've never been defiled with women. Kind of interesting that even that phrase, not defiled with women, almost like taking us all the way back to Eve. And one thing, so I just always find instances like this interesting where there's a lot of, common misunderstandings out there. Like, I used to think that the 144,000 was like the only amount of people that are being saved, just the way that people would talk about it. In particular, talking about like Jehovah's Witnesses and how people claim, Jehovah's Witnesses think that they're the only ones that are being saved. And then people bringing that in, saying they think that they're the 144,000. Just so many weird instances where there's these built up ideas that have no basis in anything biblical. Like, that doesn't make any sense. The 144,000 are 12,000 from 12 tribes. Why would that make any sense for like the 144,000 to be modern day Jehovah's Witness? And yeah, how could it be all of them if the 144,000 are virgin men? it just reminds me of, like, why do Christians do the whole Christmas tree thing if that clearly is pagan and has nothing to do with Jesus? And in Jeremiah, they even mention it in particular. And why does Catholicism even exist if the Bible never mentions a pope? And if there's even Jesus told us to not call anybody father upon this earth, and yet they have this institutionalized blasphemy. It shouldn't even exist, and yet it does. So that's what I think about with this instances like the 144,000. It's like, why are there a lot of people that talk about this stuff in ways that it's not biblical at all, and there's not a lot of exposure to, oh, this is what the Bible actually says. So continuing on, the secret song, that's just an interesting, I don't have much to say about it. The fact that the 144,000 get to know a secret song, and it reminds me, I think they tell some story about Mozart, which is probably made up. There's some story about Mozart that allegedly they went into some grand, like, there used to be secret songs where they wouldn't tell people how to play the music. But allegedly Mozart was so super smart, he just went in and listened to it one time and then went home and, like, notated it all out. Anyways, that's what that reminds me of. And in verse 5, so this is going to be side topic, talking about Paul for a little bit, popping up again. Chapter 14, verse 5 of Revelation mentions something about the 144,000 that makes them special, and it's, in their mouth is found no guile. And that's not the only instance in the Bible that mentions the word guile. John chapter 1, verse 47, Jesus praises Nathanael, and he says, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no guile." And so it's interesting researching this, because it seems like the only defense people have is they say, oh, Paul Saul wasn't saying that about himself. He was clearly saying what people were accusing him of doing. And when I read that context, I don't see that at all. I don't see how you could, I mean, I guess that's a possibility, but I really don't follow that logic. So the verse I'm talking about here is this. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 16, Paul says, "Nevertheless, being crafty, I caught you with guile." And yeah, like I just said, it seems like the only defense for Paul Saul here is to claim that he's not actually talking about himself. He's saying what other people are saying about him. Okay, that really would have to be your argument, I believe, to try to excuse Saul here in this case. But it's just an interesting chapter to begin with, and the whole idea of, wow, Saul really was being questioned, and his authority as an apostle was being questioned a lot, and people were calling him out a lot on this, and he had to defend himself a lot, and he talked about himself a lot. So your homework for 2 Corinthians chapter 12 verse 16 is to just go through and read how much Paul talks about himself. Look at how much I goes on in Paul's letters. It's very different than any other part in the Bible, how into himself Saul is. I just noticed that looking at 2 Corinthians chapter 12, the sheer number of times that Saul uses the first person singular pronoun I is very obvious. Just go skim through that. Okay, moving on to a new topic, but it's worth pointing that out. The whole guile thing really, to me, seems very important, because Jesus specifically mentions that Nathanael has no guile, and Jesus knew that 2 Corinthians would be written. Okay, Babylon is fallen. I think that's just going to be a big part of end times. My guess about this whole Babylon fallen thing, there's ships in the distance crying about the merchants. We haven't gotten there yet. That's another one of those things that I think is part of Revelation, but I couldn't tell you what chapter it's in. I think that when the end times comes, when all hell really breaks loose, when they try to pretend that the aliens are here and all that stuff, when the NWO really comes out, when the mark of the beast is really introduced, I think that a big thing that's going to happen when the one world government is introduced is that America is going to be just completely decimated. I think that has to happen. USA is just it's like the obvious top of the pyramid, and I believe that USA is Babylon. And so I think that part of the beginning of the end, the real beginning of the end, the one world order that isn't even, because nowadays the NWO is already here, or the New World Order, the one world government. It's already here. It's just that the world stage is still play pretending. There's going to be a point where it won't even be behind the scenes anymore. It will be a one world system, the beast system. And I think that at the beginning of that, Babylon, USA is going to have to be just decimated. USA will stop being a thing. And who knows what will rise from the ashes. And that's just my theory. So the wine of the wrath of God will be poured out without mixture. I wonder what that means, that the wrath will be poured out without mixture. That probably, I just have that underlined, and I think it's important. Like, that probably means something, the fact that the wrath is poured out without mixture. And in verse 12, Revelation chapter 14, verse 12, notice that even before it talks about the faith of Jesus, it says to keep the commandments. So there's a very different gospel. To bring it back to Paul, there's a very different gospel being taught in the Bible when it comes to both Jesus himself and what Jesus said, and a lot of other places that talk about keeping the commandments, talk about the importance of work. So I think that's really important. Revelation chapter 14, verse 12 says to keep the commandments. And then moving on, very relatable verses about the dead. The dead in Christ are blessed, are the most blessed. People, woe to the inhabitants of the earth. Living sucks. Life sucks and then you die. But notice how verse 12, or I'm not sure if this is verse 12 actually. Okay, this is the next verse, verse 13. That blessed are the dead, that they may rest, and their works follow them. So this chapter has a mention of keeping the commandments and another mention of works being important, that people's works follow them. At the end, I guess it's interesting to note that the sickle, because the sickle has kind of been a symbol co-opted by the Grim Reaper figure, and yet the sickle, I mean, it's more of a symbol of the end than a symbol of death. And it's not like, yeah, just it's interesting that the sickle, it's like a one-time, although there's two angels with sickles and they thrust it into the earth one, it's just something about the Grim Reaper with the sickle. It seems more of like they come to each person individually, when it's not like that. It's like it's a one event where the sickle swipes and does everybody at the same time. And then there's mention of the wine press of the wrath of God, and 1,600 furlongs, and just kind of interesting looking into the idea of a furlong, how it's a distance that has something to do with how far a team of oxen can plow. It's just interesting to think of a time when things had really grounded, like, yeah, a unit of measurement that people used for farms has to do with how far an ox can plow a field. It still has to do with what an acre is today. Kind of interesting. So that was just fun to look into. Hope you enjoyed this video. God bless everyone.